The awkward wave, waiting for it to kick in. We are live. Good morning. Thank you for joining us this morning. If you are tuning in, this is episode number 47 of Coffee with Campus Consultancy. We have a very special guest today, and I'm excited to talk about this topic. And I'm sure, given the audience and knowing what we hear in the comments and the messages, that this topic will resonate with you as well. So before I introduce the topic and before I introduce our guest for today, I just want to say thank you for tuning in. If you are listening, if you're already hearing my voice, or if you're starting to tune in to the first minute of episode 47 of Coffee with Campus Consultancy, thank you for joining, and we hope today is interesting. To get the most out of today, please engage with the conversation, whether it's texting a friend and being like, I just heard this is interesting, or directly engaging with us, jumping on the live stream to share a point of view, or jumping in the comments below and sharing a question or a thought. We'd really like to hear from you. So without further ado, a quick introduction, and let's get on with today's show. Julian, good morning.
Hey, Josh. Good to be here.
Good to have you here. Thank you for joining this morning, my friend. And given the topic that we'll be talking about today, digging into this idea of approaching university from a different mindset, a bit more of a platform point of view than as a product, I'd love to hear about, and would love for you to share, if you're comfortable, your experience with university. And I understand you had a bit of a unique journey, as I guess we all do, but especially touching uni not just once, but multiple times. Would you be comfortable sharing your journey?
Of course. I said yes to this thing. So I got to be comfortable with it.
There you go.
Just dwelling on that metaphor for a second, I find myself, so I'm a lecturer now in innovation entrepreneurship at RMIT. And I often begin my lectures by sharing these two models of university, two ways of approaching it. And one is more like, and they're both based on computer games, incidentally, which I never have any time to play. I don't know, but so one is like Tetris, right, where you turn up to class and you study or don't study for the exams, and you just wait for the challenge to be thrown at you by the lecturer, right? It's very much, and I frame this more like a product. You've purchased something and you turn up and it's delivered to you. And the second way is more like an open world video game, something more like World of Warcraft, where you actually, your engagement with university is, it's like you've got a passport to a city, but it's really up to you to find out where to go, who to collaborate with, what sort of quests to go on, etc., where the treasure is, where the hidden trapdoors are. And I always say to my students, look, you want to approach university much more like that, right? Because for several reasons. And to answer your question more distinctly with me, I mean, I went to university 3 times, I guess. I went as a school leaver. I did commerce arts at Melbourne, and I was very much in that first mindset. I turned up to class or didn't turn up to class, as it was. I studied or didn't study, but I just consumed the university experience through the conventional channels, right? I was also studying music on the side. Long story short, I ended up dropping out and working as a musician for years. When you work as a musician, you also you end up doing things like washing dishes. And I remember I was had this dishwashing job in Wellington, of all places, working 8 hours a day for this psychopathic chef, basically. I remember looking through the paper one day, going, "I got to get out of here. I got to do something," right?
Yes.
And realizing I just wasn't qualified for anything. I thought I was competent, articulate, and all the rest, as many 20-year-olds do, or whatever, but. And so I went back to university a second time at RMIT, and somewhere between that life experience, that sense of, man, this is so much better than being a low-skilled worker, I very much approach it as a platform. So every opportunity to do an exchange, or every time I saw in the newsletter there was some funding available to do something, or I volunteered for the student staff council, any of these opportunities to just get involved more. And not to be a goody two-shoes, but I was amazed at how much opportunity there was compared to being outside of that world. And I was also felt a bit sheepish about how little I'd taken advantage of that as an 18-year-old, 17-year-old when I went to uni. And I could see the same kind of patterns with the young students, the school leavers. So I think this is a little bit common for what they call mature age students, people that have come back to university, and they're a bit more, they've thought more about why they want to be there, and also the opportunities it affords. And I went to the third time was as a PhD student too, so I got another angle there.
And then by that point, the amazing uni that is RMIT has well and truly got you, and that's where you remain today, correct?
Yeah, yeah. And admittedly, that was 10 years later. You know, I went and did
Yes.
other stuff.
Yeah. Very nice. So I'm really interested there in that idea of when you mentioned, you know, as often called mature age students, and you said something like they're a little bit more clear on why they want to be there. What do you think it is about the difference between that more platform approach, the World of Warcraft, you've got a passport to the city, and the more product Tetris, take it, do what I'm told, but maybe not do overly more? Where do you think the idea of knowing your why, of why you're at university, relates to those two different approaches? Because I know when I started uni with engineering, I was very, very similar. You know, I just sort of did what I had to do. And, you know, if I didn't have all the social stuff around the side, I don't know if I would have stayed in uni either. That's what really kept me there. But now if I went back to university, like, oh, there's 5 different degrees I'd love to study, and our world is everything co-curricular. So yeah, how do you think those two ideas kind of blend together? Clarity on your why and the reason you're there.
Yeah, it's a question that could go in lots of different directions, and I'm interested in hearing about what changed for you. I mean, I know you were involved in Oak Tree as well, right?
Yeah.
So you've had this experience of the power of volunteering and contribution, and seeing where that can head, not just in an altruistic sense of giving to a worthy cause, but also in a professional sense in terms of establishing connections and people seeing competence. But the way I think of it is, and this gets into this notion of unbundling the university. So university experience, tertiary experience, is very much this bundled service, right? Where we go, on one level, we're trying to do a vocational training, you know, competence, skill-based competencies that people can do after school and pop out and presumably are fit for the workplace. Then there's these broader social aims around critical citizenship and civic identity and this stuff about, are we molding good citizens, you know, that want to contribute to society, that understand, that have general knowledge, you know, understand something about history and politics. And
yes.
But in a practical sense, it's also, I mean, Scott Galloway puts this as a very expensive form of babysitting in the US context, but it's a place young people go after school to just figure out what they want to do. You know, who they're going to date, you know, what sort of clubs and societies they might want to join, and that's a perfectly legitimate thing to do. Unfortunately, university may not be the best place to do that. It can be a great place, but many times I think if students are very much like, I don't know, some of my students, you know, they haven't turned in an assignment or something, and we get into a situation where they're finally in the office and I chat to them. I say, look, what are you doing here? You know, if you, in a positive sense, like, what's the point of
like, why are you actually here?
But I'm not angry. I'm just trying to work out, what do you want? Why are you here? And they'll say, well, actually, I don't really know. My parents say I have to do something, but I'm interested in this other thing. And my advice is usually, you know what, like, just take some time to figure it out. Get a job, pursue that other thing, because I think the employment market, it's less and less advantageous to have a sort of a degree that you're just not very interested in or passionate about. You know, as one of my students said the other day, my dad says, I just need to get a piece of paper. And I think maybe that was true. Maybe that was good advice in 1973, because fewer people had that piece of paper. It was a stronger signal in the job market. But increasingly today, when you've got 50% of the population going through university, that's not going to be a very distinguishing signal to your language, right? You want to point to a portfolio of things you've done. You want to be able to speak passionately to what you're interested in. And so for a lot of people, I think university is not the best place to do that self-identity, figuring stuff out, you know, especially if you're not engaging in this platform way, especially if you're just kind of turning up or you know, barely looking at the notes back of the lecture theater if you're there on Facebook. You're not really having that experience where you start to go, how do I match what I'm interested in, what I'm confident about, this sense of who I am and who I'd like to be, with a vocational path. That's the work of doing that. And that happens through trying stuff and figuring it out, not by having a magical moment where it comes to you, you know, in a moment of clarity, right?
Yes. Yeah, it's interesting that idea of figuring it out and it being a couple of years to explore who you are. One of the concepts I find that's really relevant in the workplace right now, and I think that note, just quickly, on the parent who says, oh, you just need a piece of paper. I always say, whenever I hear bad advice, I always say, what's their intent? And I think their intent from a parent in that situation is most likely that they care for you, they want you to get through. That's some form of encouragement, but also not letting that point of view in an outdated way be your guide today. So it's like your parents are very unlikely working in a graduate role in 2020, but there are lots of people who are. And going and speaking to those people and asking, what do you look for? What do recruiters look for? What was the experience like for you? Is much better insight because it's contextual than going, what was it like 10, 20, 30, 40 years ago? And then the idea that makes me think of, I love the work of Yuval Noah Harari. And one of the things he always talks about is that he says in the future of work, you're going to need to reinvent yourself and rediscover yourself again and again and again. And so, I've experienced that with COVID and everything going online. Like now I run online workshops, whereas I'd never done that before. And so that idea of being in a headspace where you don't say, this is me, this is who I am definitively, but approach it with a much more curiosity of who could I become if I went and did an exchange, or if I did this course, or if I lent into that thing that I really liked, even though I'm enrolled in this other degree. And I think that mindset of being open to ideas and practically reforming your identity as you grow and develop is not just a nice idea. It doesn't just help you find your passion. I think it's actually needed in the workforce. We're going to need to grow and change.
I very much agree. I like that you quoted Yuval. Kevin Kelly, another.
So good. I do.
He used this phrase in his last book of, we just have to be comfortable with being newbies, right? So
yes.
You didn't know, I assume, how to do LinkedIn Live broadcasts. You weren't,
no.
months ago, right?
Yeah.
And so this comfortability with figuring it out. There's ideas like growth mindset. It's not about being good or bad at something. It's about this magic word yet,
Yes.
And even in the sense, I was thinking about this morning as I was making coffee in prep for this, because
Very good.
I was on a podcast the other day, and they it was a great podcast, My Millennial Career. And the host said, well, tell us about a career failure, and there's this whole meme in the entrepreneurship world of fail fast, can I say the F word on this thing? If you
the fail word? Yes.
Yeah. F up nights. Can't believe I'm self-censoring myself like this.
I know, I love it. Look at you go. And F up nights are also an amazing event, which I think they'll be back very soon in Melbourne and Sydney. They're awesome.
And on one level, I think this is a great cultural pattern, right? But on another level, the notion of failure itself it seems to me it's too fixed on a particular moment, like pass, fail. And I think we talk a lot about, and this is very much this idea of someone like James Cleary with Atomic Habits, but we talk a lot about, we focus a lot on fixed points or, goals, and not enough on process. And I think if you think about your work life, your learning life more as just this extended, several decades of figuring stuff out, right? First you figure out this thing, and then you're still figuring out this thing. And that process never stops. The notion of like success and failure is backgrounded under this, because they're just points in time. You shoot past it, you come first in the marathon or you come second, but what's important is you're running every day, right? In my field now, it's you get a paper accepted or not, but what's important is you're writing every day. And I wish, unfortunately, the structure of university, at least the traditional structure, where we grade, high distinction, 85 out of 100, pass 56 out of 100, we fixate on these points. But what would be much more useful for students is thinking of it as a place, an incubator for their own life process. And what am I doing each day? What kind of habits am I doing, whether it's study, nutrition, exercise, sleep, that are going to set me up for success in the long term? And it goals help calibrate that process. But being hung up on goals and pass fail is just, I think, not the optimal psychological model to deal with this world of uncertainty, this world of flux and newbiness.
I think we could riff on that idea of the pass-fail model. There's so much wrong with it. One idea of if you've ever been in a workplace, you're not the only person employed there. If there are 15 other employees and you're like, I just need to do the minimum not to get fired. Like, not only is that a terrible strategy, but like immediately when you look around at your peers, like competence hierarchies are real. If they're going to promote someone, if they want to give an extra shift, if you know, a million other things come on. If a celebrity comes in, they want to pick someone to serve them. I mean, pick your ridiculous scenario. The boss, the manager, aka the person who's searching for potential and who holds the ability to give you opportunities to grow and develop and rise and financials and everything else. They're looking for people who go above and beyond. Like, effort is a variable. And that idea of, I'm going to go into this thing and if I just pass, that's enough. It's just, it doesn't translate to what that experience is meant to be setting you up to do. Now, I think in some areas of life, fine, a pass might be okay. It's just getting the grounding, getting things kind of rolling. But like, as a general ethos, do I want to go into a relationship and just do the minimum that it doesn't crumble? Do I want to have just enough money in the bank so I can pay my rent and nothing more? Do I want to have just the body that survives but doesn't thrive in any way? You know, I can just pull myself out of bed. Like, we'd never use that in a different area of life. Yet in the model of as you say, the traditional university model, that pass fail is a line in the sand. The other way to think of it, though, is like, well, if you didn't have that, what would that mean? Like, would there be any significance in the degree if there wasn't a pass fail? If it was, have you seen any alternatives to that, whether it's increasing that numerically, but then that's somewhat arbitrary, or have you seen or experienced any alternative modes of assessment that move away from pass fail and towards something more meaningful?
Yeah, not that successfully, and this is I'm sure they're out there, and they've, in fact, being discussed on things I've been on this week. I mean, there's great university models like Minerva.
What's that? I've not heard of it.
No, like rather than talk to examples, let's talk about the sort of notion of competition and assessment structures. Like,
yeah,
unfortunately, it does seem to be a fact of our psychology that competitive domains can sharpen performance, right? And we're still wedded to this notion of, you know, that is the fundamental signal when we accredit. You know, have they passed? Did they have it? So I see that as a hygiene factor that's difficult to get rid of. You look at the experience with MOOCs, right? When they don't have that, I mean, I don't know, what is it? 90% dropout. People don't, when it's non-accredited, non-assessed, people sign up with the best of intentions, but they just don't stick with it. Because other more pressing things. I've been that way. I've signed up for courses and gone, you know what, I've really got a lot of other stuff to go on. So it's not so much I would see as jettisoning that structure fully, but it's realizing that in a context where you have this academic inflation, where everybody effectively has this, like having a degree, certainly having a PhD, used to be you joined a small club. Now, as I said, if half the population has an undergraduate degree, you get this inflation to master's level, then more people have master's degrees. I think the signal that stands out is more towards you're saying you need to be able to complement that with a portfolio of work that you've done, with, you know, a podcast or something that you host. You need to be able to show competence in different ways. I'm very much thinking of prospective employer signals here. To go back to your point about the sort of tall poppy syndrome, you didn't frame it like that, but I see this as a kind of buggy code that we've inherited from that often happens in what sometimes called totalizing institutions, so prisons, boarding school, you know, anyone that stands out as different, especially if they put themselves forward, they've got a talent, it becomes a sort of target to be by the mob. You know, there can be this regression to the mean culture. Very that's buggy code to have going on in your head right now, because the employment dynamics don't suit that. That doesn't work for work.
I think you're right. And the reason, I think my point of view, having worked in grad recruitment for a while and now speaking with lots of students about their next steps, is no one's hiring the mean. Like before, it was very different. It was like, oh, okay, you've done, it's like, as you say, it's the master's becomes a new sort of standard. But before it was, oh, you've got into university. Oh, you must be smart. It's a great uni. You got a great degree. There's not too many of you. We'll hire you. You'll be as good as the next, you know, more or less. And then, you know, there's the whole thing about hiring and do you really know how good someone's going to be is a whole other conversation. But that idea of becoming average in order to fit in, I love Brene Brown says here, like belonging is the opposite of fitting in. And I think what we're inheriting and what we're creating and transforming is a world where to truly belong and to truly enjoy and embrace work and all your skills and gifts and magic, it's a process of discovering that thing that you're not average at, that you're not like everyone else at. One of my favorite things to do with students is to pick their 3 favorite things that they enjoy doing and then combine them into a job. And I'm like, you'll create that job that you really enjoy. It doesn't need to already exist. It doesn't have to be in a skyscraper building firm in town. But, oh, you really like podcasting and being a musician and entrepreneurship? Well, cool. How do we fit those three things together? You know, and that's a much niche market to go after.
I think there's two things in there that are worthwhile pointing out. So this sort of regression to the mean average, if you think about assembly line work and what industrialization was, this is a little bit nerdy, but I think sometimes historically differentiating why that became so powerful as a cultural force versus this moment. In many ways, that involved de-skilling people, like craftspeople that would make something like this cup and make it distinctly, non-generically. A lot of what mass production was saying, no, don't put your signature on it. Just stand there on the line and do the same thing. We just need robotic bodies, right? And you have to do that this time. And when the bell goes off, we need you on the line, and then we need you to stop at this time. Yeah.
And I don't want to stop you, but I just want to inject there. And at the time, it was, we'll pay you more to do less.
Yeah.
Better working conditions, increase safety, and increase pay.
Yeah. This was Henry Ford's $5 a day kind of.
Exactly. Which is it's a worth, and I'm sorry to interrupt again, but it's such an important note because, as we'll get to, it's now the opposite of that today. And those old assumptions, as you say, buggy code.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And it's ironic, but the word buggy is kind of a play on words there, right? Because cars, that innovation actually came
That's funny.
The manufacturing industry. There you go. All right. Super.
Let's
pull ourselves out from 19.
We're in a couple of layers deep here.
Yeah. But many people have heard of Frederick Taylor and the notion of Taylorism. I mean, that was his big innovation. It was like, I just want to turn bodies into cogs in a machine. And unfortunately, and that sort of worked even in bureaucratic white collar work, you know, typing, filing, etc. So unfortunately, a lot of our education systems bear that mark still of this mass production, massification, standard sorting, generic sorting, right? Now, I think it's really obvious that now that is a terrible strategy, right? in a kind of creative knowledge work economy, you want completely the opposite. In some ways, ironically, it recapitulates the dynamic pre-industrially where craftspeople had their own signatures, right? Their own, that's a candlestick or whatever it is made by that master craftsman. And so what knowledge workers are doing today is developing their own signature craft. On the previous podcast, we were talking about it as vibe. So, vibe sounds like a really vague term, right? That's not, what do you mean? You've got a vibe? Obviously, you don't put that on your CV. I've got vibe. But what you're doing here, it's not just the information that's being transferred. It's the way that you host it, the way that you smile, you know, the affective qualities, right?
Thanks,
and these are very powerful. And it's not just about you, but it's whether you like someone or not, whether someone has a personal brand that resonates with you, is as much about this assemblage of factors as it is about much more so than their high distinction that they got on their friggin' second-year quantitative methods.
Yes.
Right.
It's interesting. I love that point about the signature. And like one of the things you see now, even in like a super social, you know, almost celebrity influencer kind of way, but we see sound signatures popping out on podcasts. I mean, we have the introduction to this show. Like if someone heard that in the background, they're like, oh, that's Josh's coffee. What's that thing that Josh does with the coffee? And it's like the words don't matter. And I think that's really interesting. But that digital signature that you'll see, the audio signature that you'll hear, the color schemes when people create a personal brand, gosh knows why I chose pukey gold. But like, regardless of those things, I think, as you say, it's forming, it's a little bit more artistic. And I always define what I do as artistic. And I was a musician as well. It was my best grade in school. And I always define what I do as art. And Seth Godin talks about this and says, if it is art, well, if it's work, you'll work really hard at it and it'll exhaust you. But if it's art, you work really hard at it and there is no end. You want to keep making it. You want to make your art. And in the same way, someone asked me yesterday, oh, so what's next for you in campus? And I'm like, if you're speaking to, Elise Perry or LeBron James, it'd be bowl more cricket balls or shoot more hoops and try to get better at it. And I think it's such a different mindset of like, oh, I need that next title or I need that next pay rise or I'm going to go to this company. It's like, I'm going to just keep making and learning and growing and developing in the same way that I would hope I wouldn't hope from what I understand of history, the old artists, the old composers, the old artisans, they just keep making. And it would, even now, like the coffee cup that I've got was made by a former student from a workshop and she gave it to me as a gift. And you know, there's a million more structurally integrative coffee cups that hold the heat better, and it's even getting a little water stained now because I use it every day. But because it's hers, and I like that, and I would pay a premium for that. And there's a connection there, and there's a story.
There's a bunch of things in there that are cool to tease out. So one is the more you can think of your work as a practice over your life, like craft, like artistic, like I think that is helpful.
Yes.
The more you're intrinsically motivated. I mean, it's not that intrinsic motivation is away from money or status or anything like this. Like I literally just listening to a podcast before this and Jeffrey Miller talking about, you know, the signaling that arts and creativity has for mate selection and everything. So it's not completely sits apart, but the fact is, like, I enjoy sitting down and playing piano. I don't do it because you know, I'm clocked on or whatever, right? It's interesting, it's satisfying. Now it's I couldn't have done that with washing dishes, so I'm always sensitive to this. Like it does depend on finding something, being in certain circumstances. Or maybe I could have, but I don't. Maybe there is a way to stand there 8 hours and wash dishes and see it as a kind of Zen-like melding. But it sometimes does involve a bit of a pivot or adjustment to finding a place, a niche that you can draw on a set of skills that you don't want to escape from. You know, you don't want to come home and just kind of zone out and play video games or whatever because it's alienating, soul-destroying work. So that's one. I think it might be worth touching on this notion of personal branding too, because that can be quite a yucky, that can evoke a sense of self-commodification. A lot of people find that slightly abhorrent or unsettling, or at least really naked expressions of it. I don't mean literally naked. I mean like, you know, where people are just clearly, you know, almost desperately self-promoting. There seems to be something distasteful about that as well.
Yeah.
And this is an interesting one to dwell on, because we don't give, there's a lot of informal advice around, but we don't sit down at university and say, this is how you personally brand yourself.
Which increasingly we're seeing as well. Like I'm coming so much of that at uni saying, hey, can you come and teach kids how to use LinkedIn? Like it's a requirement now. And anyway, we'll come back to that. But
all I say is this is happening whether you consciously do it or not. Right? You walk into a room and people make quick impressions about you. Right now it's happening. People are deciding, people that your long-term fans that all know you, that never heard of me, they're deciding, do I like this guy? Is he worth listening to? Is credible? You know, why does his hair look funny? What's going on in the back? Like all of these things add up, right? And it doesn't mean you need to obsess over all of them, but I think it does mean you do want to take the blinkers off and go, this is happening. Am I conducting myself, comporting myself? You know, everything from, you know, what I wear into a job interview to the way I use my hands or whatever. Is this communicating the thing that I think is most important about who I am and what I want to do? I think that's worth considering.
Agreed. And when you going to that product versus platform idea, the World of Warcraft, explore your own, make university your own, in the same way that you can use Facebook as a platform and create whatever you want. You can create your photo fan page. You can create a Julian WL fan page. You could do a book review. You can do whatever on Facebook. In the same way on Spotify, you could start a podcast about literally anything, about coffee cups or about books or flowers or whatever you like. In the same way, I think with university, thinking of it as a platform is the place for you to create. Yeah. It's a place for you to put in value, not take out value exclusively. Like, yes, if you have a great lecturer, if you're in one of Julian's classes and you're listening in right now, by all means, take the information, challenge, push, but also what can you add and contribute to student life? Not because it's, I think you were making a point before about like the money side of this. It's like, I have a belief, and that's if I give more, I will get more in return. And sometimes people say, oh, that sounds a bit selfish. I'm like, I think for me, it's the best version of selfish I've come across yet. We all act in our own self-interest psychologically. Like we don't do things for no reason. You might once, but after a while you'll stop. There has to be something in it for you. And it can just be that it makes you feel good to give. But my belief is if I just give, if I put stuff out, if I try stuff, I wear my heart on my sleeve, and if I try to create things, eventually a lot of that will come back in interesting and creative ways. That's part of the fun of the journey. So using uni as a platform and thinking, well, what could I create? What could I start? Really just pragmatically as a student, whether that's starting a new student club, whether that's starting a mentoring program, running a fundraiser for something you care about, going for a position that's, you know, a leadership role on campus, or if you're at RMIT, dropping into Activator and starting a business or joining a startup or going to a class where you create. I think that's for me, that was the gap where no one ever told me that explicitly at uni, but I found myself enjoying myself the most when I was creating. And a good buddy of mine said to me when we got into the workforce, he said, "You're most committed to what you create." His grandfather always used to say that to him. So whenever we made systems as engineers, we'd spend our weekends coding up these intricate Excel sheets, because if we made the system, then we were so much more committed to finding the bugs and making it work. And it was art still, even as something as dry as an Excel sheet.
Yeah, again, there's a number of things in there that I think are really important. The last point you said, with a nod back to history, you know, this is I wouldn't normally. I don't know how many times Karl Marx has been invoked on this.
This is the first.
All right, there you go.
This is the first.
This was one of his fundamental critiques, I think, inside of industrialization, that it alienated workers from the product of their labor. So the point you were talking about just then is like feeling this pride in the creation, the sculpting. He said when craftspeople made something like this, you know, that traditionally there was like you made the entire object and you knew how to do that, right? And there's something intrinsically rewarding. I think most people can relate to this when you make, I don't know, you
bake a cake or something.
Yeah, cooking is a thing, or people that like to tinker around in a woodshed, you know, you make a chair or something, and there's something very intrinsically satisfying about the process of creation and then seeing its actual use value. And his critique is with large scale work is people become separated from the product of their labor. So if your job is shifting around information on a spreadsheet inside a 40,000 person company, you know, you feel very distant from the actual value, the end product, the end service, right? One of the satisfying things about teaching in a way is, you know, however good or bad you are, it's you make the slides, you give the talk, you set the test, whatever the questions. So there is a closeness between the people that receive that and not. So what's the cash value of that? I mean, finding work, I think this is why so many young people are attracted to entrepreneurship in theory, if not in practice, because the numbers sometimes actually aren't as high as the interest levels are. But I think people love the idea of building something, a company or a product that that bears their signature, that they've sculpted, if you like. So that's one. And then what was the other thing you said about creating? Oh yeah, I had something else to say about that, but I've completely forgotten now. Once I mentioned Marx, I started thinking about history.
No, that's good.
No, I think what I would do is endorse what you said, that some students come. Oh yeah, now I remember what it was. Some students come to university and they seem, for whatever reason, to have got the memo that this is a place that the more you do, probably the more benefit you're going to get, the more you stand out. And maybe that's because they had some volunteering experience as a teenager. Maybe that's just the way they do it in their family, right? But they just seem to have come with the code that I think actually benefits them. Why does it benefit them? Because there's a lot of people paid at that university, certainly at RMIT, to find initiatives that students are leading, right? To hold them up, to put them in the newsletter, to celebrate their success, to take photos, to make videos about what they're doing. Like there's a lot of incentives pointed towards putting those sort of student initiatives on a pedestal. And that can only be good for you if you're a young person looking to find opportunity in the world, right? There is that sort of a bit of success begets success dynamic.
The old Matthew principle's a killer if you really want to go back. Like that idea of to those who have everything more will be given, you know, it's a brutal piece of scripture, but there's an element of that of in a competitive workforce, that's part of the reality is if you stand out just a little bit and go that little bit further, then someone's going to come along and tap you on the shoulder. Oh, you'd be a great ambassador. Once you're a great ambassador, then you get to meet people and talk about everything you've done. And it just ratchets.
It's a connection. Yeah, it's a snowball effect, but ideally it's one that people aren't shut out from. I mean, honestly, in my class,
that's the harder bit.
Yeah, I mean, sure, there can be a flywheel effect that the more podcasts you're on, the more people invite you on podcasts. You know, the more talks you invited to give at conferences, paid talks, the more people do it, right? So there is that effect. And often, I remember years ago, there was a sense of, well, how do I start? Like, it's one thing. It's like when you apply for a job, and your first job, and they say, well, where's your experience? And you go, well, how do I get experience, right?
Mm.
So kicking off that effect is the trick. And that's why I'm saying university is a great place to do that, because say in my, this isn't supposed to be shilling for my course, but I'll just give it as an example. It's a work integrated learning course where we're helping students find an organization to work with, and then they're developing a proposal for innovation, right? They're developing a deliverable where they say, so they've got something to show at the end of it. And I think accumulating these artifacts where you can say, here's actually what I've done, is super important. Accumulating the connections where someone says, hey, that was really cool. I just did it yesterday. One of my students did a really cool strategy deck for Jimmy Brings. The Jimmy Brings is like an Uber Eats for alcohol. And I reached out. I mean, he didn't know them, but I reached out to the head of marketing there, and said, hey, one of my students has done this cool thing, I've got his permission to share it. And they liked it. They said, this is interesting because it's mirroring some of the strategy conversations we're having internally. I thought that was a cool thing. Now, the problem is there's little incentive for me as an academic to do that necessarily explicitly. But what I'm constantly trying to do is say, here's like reducing the gap in social capital here. There's a potential connection that student could have that just gives the foot in the door, metaphorically, right? And so I think what students should be thinking of when they're in the first and second year is, how do I start this effect? How do I kick it off? Can I host a meetup? Can I, as you said, can I volunteer to do something that will establish a connection that gives me access potentially to that, to information, to a job opportunity that I otherwise wouldn't encounter? This is the notion of weak ties. You know, people that you don't know well, that you want lots of these, that give you exposure to new bits of information.
I love the idea of kicking things off too, and maybe to loop back to what we were talking about before of that, you know, I'll do the minimum just to pass. It's just a piece of paper, please get degrees, all that sort of stuff. I think what I always say to students, what we're all about is encouraging people to go above and beyond and to lead and to take on a project, exactly like you're saying. I think the flow-on effect of that is when you go, well, we'll do our academics, we'll lock that down, we'll get a good grade, and then we'll volunteer or start a project or do a work integrated learning or whatever it happens to be. You become the sort of person who goes into a workplace, who does their job and then has one eye open for different problems and opportunities you could solve. And so like everywhere where I've benefited professionally over various roles, whether it's working in a nightclub or at a restaurant or in recruitment for a nonprofit or running a business, so much of the growth comes from, I do what people expect and hopefully I pride myself on over delivering, but then I'm always looking for, oh, what about this? We could do this, we could try that. Over there, they do this. And that, I think a lot of that mentality came from my time as a student going, oh, if I try this opportunity out, I never know what other door will open. And I've kind of gone through a year 11, 12 teacher said to me, like you kind of collect, every time you develop a skill, it's like getting a key and you never know what door that key will open. And so if you do a strategy for an alcohol delivery company, like that same marketing strategy when you're 35 and realize that raising money for breast cancer research is what you really care about for whatever reason, you can go, oh, well, I remember I did a strategy for how to market and sell a product once. What if we applied that to this fundraising effort? Or what if I applied that to my casual job at the on-campus cafe? You know, we're on level 3. How do we get students up from the study level below up to here? What sort of incentives could we provide? What are the pillars of value that they want? And the crossover, for me, the crossover is all the fun. It's figuring out, oh, how does my engineering degree help me do what I'm doing right now? And it's amazing how, you know, the little crossovers exist. Weak ties, maybe to butcher, I know what the term means, but weak ties in your skills and how you use them too. And I've collected these things.
I think that's quite related. So on one level, a lot of what creativity is, what looks creative, is taking something that works in one context and applying it to a new context, right?
Yes, exactly.
So, I mean, you hear this in you hear this in the startup world as tropes. It's like Uber, but it's Airbnb, but for sheds or whatever. So
the Uber of screwdrivers.
Yeah. I mean, that can be done in a way that's a little bit simplistic at times, but in a more everyday sense, this is what creative people are doing a lot. I mean, you look at music genres and things. If we go back to music, a lot of it's like, well, what if funk, right? If we took this blues form, but put a different kind of beat on it or a repeating bass line in this way, and then we put horns from. So it's just very little is in the world is pure invention. A lot of it's adaptation of seeing something that worked here and doing it over there. So you want to sharpen your mind to be doing this constantly, because then you stand out in the workplace. And then the more, you know, sometimes people say, well, I've got a pretty varied career. It doesn't look like it's going in a straight line. And you make that sort of, you know, that, well, I've got one of those. So like I did this and then I did this. And so it can look all over the place, but you put that to work for you, not against you. You say, well, when I worked in the nonprofit sector, I saw we had this issue. And now that I'm working in this startup, what if we put these two things together, right? So as Joseph Schumpeter said, a lot of innovation is just novel combinations of ideas that already exist, right? So that's one. And then I wanted to say something about, I love your key metaphor. You know, you assemble a set of keys on a chain, but you don't know which door they're going to unlock. And again, I don't mean to instrumentalize people, but professional connections are like that too. Like you just never know when you're going to end up working with somebody, for somebody, hiring them or whatever. So it's in your own interest to comport yourself well, to stay on good terms with people, but also to check in with people every now and then. I mean, in my life, I had to formally apply for the job I'm in now, but most of the work, 90% of the work that I've found hasn't been through, you know, seeing an ad somewhere and formally applying. It's been through talking to someone at a party or bumping into someone at an event and them saying that someone seeing me speak and saying, hey, can I have a coffee? And then we talk about something. So it's really come through these informal sets of connections where trust and competency is built through seeing it directly, rather than through the trying to signify that in the form of a CV and a cover letter. It's not to say that stuff isn't important. There's certainly certain careers, you know, it's essential. But my sense is the dial is moving, often even surrounding the dark matter surrounding that formal interview is these set of informal connections that you have. And again, I feel like I'm saying something really obvious there. But my sense is for a lot of students that I have, this is, they haven't been enculturated to see the world like this.
100%. And that's like, you would know this from the musical background. Like one of the most important, I remember gigging before when I was younger and at university, we did it just for fun, but there's a whole bunch of different people who are players in that system. And there's sort of the traditional fans and the people who like it. But then there's a person in the audience who you don't know owns a nightclub in the background. And they might not even look like they're interested, but then all of a sudden when they have an opening, they're like, oh, I saw this guy play. Or the importance of what does it mean when you arrive at a venue to win over the sound guy and the back of stage staff and the house manager. I learned this working in bars and restaurants and in service, that I was always trying to be curious of why everyone was working here and how the economics kind of flowed and what they wanted. And, I knew that I needed to make the manager look really good because that was the show of it. And then I just needed to treat the security staff with like utmost respect and admiration because they kept me safe. And then the bartender made all their money off tips. So for them, I just need to get as many people in the door as possible. And so the way I get around, I love how you said the keys on the chain are kind of like networks, but not wanting that to seem too transactional. My view is, how can I serve? How can I help you? What do I have? Who do I know? What could I learn? What could I bring or give that could help you get what you're looking for whatever reason, you know? And I remember in a couple of workplaces, finding out only after months of working there that someone who was a bit uptight actually had a family at home and they're a single parent. And so they were really concerned about the money. And I was always like a bit like, you know, because it's not super important to me. I had a bit of pushback when I was younger and I grew up a little bit and was like, money's really important for them so they can feed their family. And so I was like, okay. So if I can show that I'm aligned with their interests there, then that helps them feed their family. And being a family person is what their identity is. And so those layers of, just those layers of what is it that someone's appearing to want, what do they really want, and then how does that serve their identity at a deeper level? Something.
Said a couple of cool things in there. So one, it sounds like you naturally have, or whatever, but from a young age were building these sort of systems analysis of incentive structures in a particular place. Like, so what it
sounds so much more fancy when you describe it like that.
Yeah, but it's interesting to hear someone like really to go. And some people have this, right? It's like, well, what's going to make the security guard's day, you could say, but also what are the incentives driving him or her? and so then you said the bartender, and then whoever else was the DJ
Yeah.
before or whatever. And then it sounds like what you're doing is going, well, how to some degree they've got individual incentives. How can I orchestrate this in a collective way so what I'm doing actually doesn't piss off one of them and actually benefits them? What I like about it is if you translate to the university context. So students, again, they'll often see, well, I go to my course, there's my teacher, here's the 3 assessment pieces I need to do for that, right? But if you think about the university is a much more complex version of that bar, where there's student support people, there's the activator or the whatever university incubator, accelerator is, they've got a set of incentives driving them. There's the marketing people, they've got their own incentives. And if you can sort of work out, university as platform, here's an opportunity to study the different players in this ecosystem and the incentives that drive them, and try and work out how you can both benefit them. This isn't being callous and calculating, and this is actually helping them do their job, making their day by working out how to add value that will also benefit you. And it's funny, I when I was younger, like if someone had have said that to me, I said, well, that does sound a bit transactional. Shouldn't you just help people because it's the right thing to do? Yeah, I mean, it can be the right thing to do. It can feel like the right thing to do. It's no less the right thing to do if you're helping them in ways that also benefit you and them. But now I just see this as smart game design, because if what we want as society is a set of interlocking games where people, in order for people to win in that little game, they're also creating value, positive externalities, as economists would say. They're creating value that benefits other people, right?
Yes.
So if winning your game is selling cigarettes to kids, that's not a positive externality. You might get money, right? But that's to use a harsh example. But if winning your game, like I would say you're doing, is sharing insight for free about career strategies, career tactics for young people, and that means you actually benefit. It also means other people benefit. In this case, it means I benefit. You're finding games where there's there's mutual benefit, and I just think a game doesn't inherently, just because 2 parties win, other people could lose. But what we want is a set of interlocking games that actually have a net benefit, have those positive externalities. And I think there's a way of approaching university like that that's good for you as a student, good for your profile, your experience, your accruing of relationships. Also great for the university because they get to feature good, success stories.
Yes, 100%. And the fundamental shift that I've come to realize there is, do you look at the world as a limited sum game, or do you look at the world as abundance? And for me, it's abundance. I don't think if we in some way have some overlap in our skill set, if someone wants a speaker on students and the power of entrepreneurship, if someone goes, oh, I saw Julian on this show and we'd love to have him speak at a conference about this topic, and that part of me goes, that's amazing for Julian. Awesome. I hope that you have a million more of those opportunities. And I think where it's really fun and the friendships that I've nurtured and connections that have really grown are when I can cheer someone else on, they can cheer me on, even at the intersection of our 2 skill sets, even in this tiny little part. And then there are things like different things that we can talk about that are totally different, but I don't think anyone else's success comes away from mine. It doesn't mean you're not smart and you don't look at a competitive marketplace and try to bring a unique value. To me, that's about serving the people I'm trying to serve. But if someone comes in and is better at doing what I do than me, amazing. Like if they can solve the problem better than me, I care about the problem being solved. And there's plenty of problems in the world that I'm both interested in and are painful to witness, and I'd love to work towards. And so until we run out of problems, we won't run out of opportunities. And until we run out of opportunities, your success does not come at the expense of anybody else's. And that ultimate success is in your head and your heart and your soul anyway. It's not in a bank account. So I think there's some interlocking themes there. But for me, what's really fun with this space and for students is to go, in my uni experience, fine, yes, in some ways you might get ranked or compared to other students. Not everybody can win the university medal. Great. But when we get in the workforce, there's no shortage of people who earn lots of money, who have a fancy office, who are really, really unhappy. And the data in the workforce is less than 1 in 7 people love what they do. So if you're at uni and you're finding opportunities where my metric with everything is, am I growing and am I giving? And if you're growing and learning something new and being creative, if you see something as art, if it's fun, if you lose yourself in that flow state of hours go by and you feel like you're making the world, my metric for this, I'd love to hear yours, is just net positive. Like, how do I know what the most good I can do in the world is? Should I earn a bunch of money, give it to charity, or go work for the charity? Who knows? That's a complicated one. But if everyone just did something that they believed in their soul was net positive, which had more positive externalities than negative, like if all of us did that, I think we'd have a dramatically different world. And I know I didn't do that for years. I realized that, hey, getting really good at getting people into nightclubs and getting them really, really intoxicated.
Yeah.
You know, I realized I was like, oh, that's probably, I'm having lots of fun and I'm rationalizing it, but I'm like, that's probably a negative. And then once I realized that, I was like, okay, I need a different way. And it took me years, but I think I'm on that journey still.
I like what you said there, and I want to say something. So there's a very good podcast on this by a woman called Laurie Santos. I think she's at Stanford, called the Happiness Podcast. And
okay, cool. Happiness Podcast.
It's a serial sort of thing where she goes deep into the psychological, sort of best psych research we have, including the evolutionary psychological foundations for why things like helping people actually benefit you, right? And she begins by saying, when I first encountered this, I thought it sounded like Californian BS, right? So
yes, same.
You know what I mean? Like, I had a lot of that too. I was a cynical jazz musician in Melbourne. You know, if someone's ongoing, you know, you just got to give and you'll get it back. It always sounded a little bit Oprah Winfrey kind of pop psych stuff, right? And pretty soon you're in the secret territory and you got your vision board and it's my mind creates reality. So if people are listening to this and have some of that suspicion, I have a lot of that too instinctively. But what I find is the research actually backs up what you're saying very well. Like, people get an incredible amount of benefit from acts of generosity, from acts of gratitude as well. So there's a psychological trap we can all fall into of looking at the world as a zero-sum game. You know, you're flicking through Instagram, which, by the way, I think of now like smoking cigarettes. You know, this stuff can be very destructive for you. Well, maybe not that bad, but like coffee, you know, you have too much and a little bit's maybe okay, or alcohol isn't right. So it's very easy to go, oh my God, everybody else seems to be crushing it. You know, why am I such a loser? Like in many ways, these platforms, whether by intent, whether by design or just by consequence, they're having this effect psychologically on people, right? Because everybody's putting this kind of idealized best self version forward. But at least in my own life, I try and catch myself if I'm ever falling into that zero-sum dynamic, that just because this person is doing well, that somehow means I'm losing in the game of life. That's just not true in most contexts. Very few times in life that is true, right? There's a few zero-sum games do exist, but most of what has enabled us as a species, to get back to Yuval Harari, to create this amazing amount of abundance for 9 billion people, albeit very unequally shared, but there's still, you know, like, it's a lot better to be alive today, even in lower income levels than 500 years ago, has been the lack of zero-sum games. The fact that you can do your thing and be great at it, I can do my thing, we can work together, and putting those things together can actually benefit us both without subtracting, without one of us winning and the other one losing, right? And just to bring it right back to music, I mean, playing music when you were first speaking is a great, you know, I played improvised music, so it was jazz and stuff like this. And it's just a great example of the better the bass player does, or the better the drummer does, the better it is for me, right? And so what you want, when you were talking about the sort of Venn diagram overlaps of expertise, I mean, that to me probably set more of a template than I've appreciated until moments like this for how I would approach group work. You know, it's like we want to contribute to something, a shared project, in ways where we find our unique niche, and the better each one of those players is, the better thing we can create together. I mean, that strikes me, it should be the template for much collaborative creative work. But unless you've really had a good experience with that, status signals can get in the way, where you can start to go, well, she said that in the meeting, that's going to make me look bad, I better one up, or, you know, you just don't want to play those sort of games.
You're right. Julian, I'm going to have to run to dive into a 9 o'clock. I feel like we could actually just keep talking in hours and hours and hours. And I think it's a testament to that idea of we're creating out of the overlap, which is beautiful. Thank you for coming on today. You're absolutely amazing. If people want to follow and learn more about you, or if they're RMIT students, which a big chunk of the audience actually is, and they want to find more about your course, where's a good place for them to go and check you out?
So I teach a course called Driving Innovation in Organizations in the Entrepreneurship and Innovation program, but it's an elective that anyone in the university can take, so far as I understand. And I'm on LinkedIn and Twitter, and my name is pretty easy to find. So I'm always happy to speak to students in general, especially RMIT students, because that's my job. Thanks for the invite too.
Mate, you're absolutely amazing. I'm looking forward to catching up with you as always again.
Bye for now.
Awesome. Bye for now. And thank you everyone for joining us today. Episode 47. I hope you enjoyed that. Let us know in the comments or send myself or Julian a message and let us know what did you get out of today. Have an amazing Thursday and we'll speak with you soon. Bye.